It's a year after Sky News Australia aired an investigation by my colleague Sherry Markson, which uncovered evidence that the lab leak theory was a real possibility. Let's go live now to Professor John Blaxland. He's a professor in strategic and defence studies at the ANU. Thanks so much for your time as always. A lot of speculation, reports around this. Now the FBI confirming it's their theory as well that it was a lab leak. What's your take on the timing of all of this?
So it's a vindication for Sherry Markson, that's for sure. And it does suggest that Marise Payne wasn't off the mark when she, as Foreign Minister, pushed the point, even though she's been criticised for how she did that unilaterally. But the timing is really interesting. This is at the time when the United States is also pressuring China over the 12-point peace plan and the prospect of China being directly supporting the Russians militarily. And there's rumours circulating of China being prepared to backfill Russian equipment in eastern Russia to enable the Russians to relocate some of their equipment to bolster their capabilities in the war in Ukraine. And that's clearly something the United States is very dead set against. So, you know, it's not exactly clear that there's a correlation, but because correlation isn't causation, as they say, but certainly it is interesting, the timing, that this is now adding extra pressure on China. This is coming on top of significant trade strains, even though numerically the trade between China and the United States is as big as ever, as it is for Australia. We're trading more with China than ever. If you know, you can argue around the margins on that, but the trade is robust regardless. And so the position is, well, what does that do for China in terms of how it positions itself? Because it clearly needs the United States. It also needs Europe. Arguably, economically, way more than it needs Russia, but strategically, it needs Russia more.
Yeah, and is it fair to say, Professor Blaxland, that the FBI director wouldn't have made that call with Brett Bayer on Fox News without the approval? The FBI director wouldn't have done that without the approval of the president?
Highly unlikely. He's a presidential appointee. The FBI director has FaceTime with the president routinely. This would be something that he well and truly cleared with the president before he went ahead to do it. No question in my mind, which is why I suspect that there's a bit of a coordinated messaging going on, not to detract from the prospect of it being a reasonable assessment of what's happened. Department of Energy is now doing that as well, other agencies as well, although I acknowledge that there is not consensus across the various agencies in the United States on the lab leak hypothesis. But it does add momentum to that, and it does suggest that there's pressure here for China to make more concessions to the United States and to be mindful of America's wishes when it comes to Russia.
So does it lead then to more tension between Washington and Beijing? You gave us a bit of the context around the current tensions over Ukraine and so on. Is it your view that it will exacerbate things?
So it really depends on how China wants to respond. It's got a couple of options here. It could take offence. It could double down. I suspect, though, we've seen with President Xi lately backing off the wolf warrior rhetoric and looking to make rhetorical concessions to get greater confidence from Europe, particularly from the United States as well. They've already got a fair amount of compliance from some of the African states that they trade with extensively, particularly on some of the rare earths and other minerals. So the question is, how much does Xi want to push back? How important is the US relationship? And how much are they prepared to put on the table in terms of risking that relationship and the ones with Europeans, particularly Germans, over their investments? So, I mean, I think it's hard to tease out and separate the issues of what's happening with companies like Apple, which is relocating a lot of its production, other American corporations with the tech blockages that have been articulated in recent months. There's a lot of pain to be had here, and the United States under President Biden seems to be prepared to take steps that others have not been contemplating earlier.
Professor Blaxland from the ANU, great to get your insights. A developing story today, a very interesting one. We'll talk to you soon.